You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. This is Force 13 Live, and we are tracking 3 tropical cyclones around the world once again. Laura, Marco, and Typhoon Bavi in the Western Pacific, but most of the eyes are directed towards Atlantic shores, and this is the live look at what Marco looks like right now, a Category 1 hurricane with winds of 75 miles per hour. If you've missed, or if you're struggling to keep up with all the information as it comes in, the latest information on this one is that a tropical storm warning has been issued from Cameron to west of Morgan City, Louisiana. A lot of areas under watches and warnings, which we'll get onto as time goes on during this stream. As for Laura, that's intensifying as well. That is at 60 miles per hour now and a pressure of 1,000 millibars. There it is over Haiti, roughly. Well, getting towards southern Cuba now, actually. And that is going to be, well, probably skimming the southern coast of Cuba all the way through to the Gulf of Mexico. So that is something to watch very closely. Tropical storm warning for pretty much all of Cuba, Haiti, the Inagua and Ragged Islands of the Bahamas. My name's Nathan Foy. I'm not sure whether this will work, but let's try it anyway, and hopefully all the panels load. Well, we've got most of them. There we go. We've got pretty much all of them. I'm also joined by the team in this live stream as well. Tonight, consisting of quite a few people, we're joined by Ike, Mike, myself, Kay, Ryan, Leahy, Nelson, Strat, and Euxinator. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Good evening again.
Ike and Mike, fancy that. And we've got a few people who are closer to the action than earlier today as well. I guess the person who's best placed to start us off tonight is Nelson. You're joining us from New Orleans. Pretty much in the middle of both of these systems at the moment.
Yeah, right now we aren't under any of the cones at the moment, which is a nice bit of relief, but the storm preparations are going on and have been for some time. I've had to do some work to shore up some things with my house, my shed, make sure loose objects were put away. I had the chance to go to a couple different hardware stores and saw generators just flying out the doors, so it does seem that people in the area are taking the necessary precautions, even though we're not exactly sure what's going to happen right now. As I said, I am out of the cone, but I'm still under a storm surge warning, a hurricane watch, within a few 100 feet of being in a hurricane warning, tropical storm warnings, everything like that, so it's kind of a watch and wait period at this point.
Yes, it certainly is. Do you feel concerned about this? And is it Marco more than Laura at this point?
Yeah, it all depends, and I'm sure we'll get to it later, about the intensification of Laura as she moves on into the Gulf and past the islands that she's near right now. But yeah, Marco is what we're really concerned about, given the effects could happen as early as tomorrow. And it's a lot less anxious than I was yesterday, I'll tell you that, when you're in the cone for 2 storms and don't know how quickly they're going to come about. Right now we've actually got breathing room. I'm staying in my house in New Orleans for Marco for its impacts. I don't feel the need to leave. And then, yeah, I've got a day and a half to make the determination if I need to leave for Laura, if something happens and the track shifts or it gets incredibly intense and large.
Now, earlier on today, we did that other stream, of course, and since then, models have sort of started trending away from the Louisiana coast. National Hurricane Center still thinks that Marco will make landfall there as a hurricane, but some models are now deviating away, and indeed, if you follow the edge of the cone there, it is still a possibility that it won't make landfall in Louisiana. What are our thoughts on that? Floor's open.
I mean, the threat with Laura, it's still pretty track dependent right now, exactly, and we've seen some shifts still going on with the models. We're actually a bit further east again than we were earlier today, but it is quite notable that the exact track and intensity at the day 3 to 4 point, which is really going to determine the exact landfall location, is still not really clear. I think the most notable point, though, is that regardless of the exact landfall location in the United States, most likely for Laura, that impacts will extend significantly far away from the center. So even if it makes landfall along the southwest coast of Louisiana, you're probably still going to be getting some sort of impacts all the way east into New Orleans and likely beyond associated with the system at that point in time. So if you're not in the 5-day cone of uncertainty right now, don't rule out potential risks from the system. Even though its exact path and intensity aren't the clearest right now, it's been trying to intensify in a very short window between exiting Hispaniola and more interaction with Cuba, which wasn't really initially expected. So the fact that it's doing that right now should definitely keep people on guard heading forward.
We're looking at Laura now on the satellite imagery, and if you couldn't find its center before, it's much clearer now. It's just south of the southern flat coast of Cuba there, and moving west-northwest. And still looks like it's intensifying a little bit, at least 60 miles per hour right now. I've heard rumblings, I've been a little bit out of the loop, but rumblings that it could be stronger. Or that some people think it might be stronger.
Recon went in there and they found 72 knots flight level, which would be indicative of up to 60 knots surface.
Yeah.
However, the NHC believed it was due to a local feature that is unrepresentative of the overall circulation. Therefore, they went with a significantly lower 60 miles an hour.
Oh, I thought Strat was going to say something there. Yes, definitely, and you can still see its movement there. And I'm a bit worried about this because if that movement keeps up, then it's headed for the Cayman Islands, and it's headed south of Cuba, the big landmass. And so its strengthening phase could be initiated earlier.
Yes. I've been tracking from radar most of the day UK time, and it's been moving very little north of due west, which is concerning if it continues.
Yeah, and I have this imagery up on my screen right now if you want to pull it up that Kay shared. It's the all the guidance for the tracks on the left side and then the intensity and pressure models. You can see explicitly that the black line, which is the best track from what's occurred since these runs came out, that the actual track is south of all of these models, even in the shortest range. All these expected a move more directly over the far eastern portions of Cuba and a much more direct path either over most of Cuba or just offshore. The 5 p.m. National Hurricane Center cone is actually a bit south of these as well. It's much more indicative of potential only a bare landfall along the very western side of Cuba, with the storm remaining at least a dozen or 2 dozen miles offshore throughout most of its path. If it continues this trend further south and west, though, of the old expectations, then you might see further adjustments southward, less direct land interaction with Cuba, and the potential for this thing to maybe get a little bit stronger than initially expected during its phase before it enters the Gulf of Mexico during the rest of its trip near the northwestern Caribbean or just barely over Cuba.
Indeed.
Yes.
If it moves just 50 or so miles offshore of Cuba, in the extreme northern West Caribbean, it would have the potential to strengthen into a hurricane or even commence rapid intensification. We've seen this in the past. We've seen Charlie become a major hurricane in this area. We've seen Gustav almost hit Category 5 in this area, and we've seen Dennis hit its peak intensity in this area. So it's
I was thinking about
Laura to strengthen.
I was thinking about Gustav just then as well. Does get a bit of that feeling, and this is the wider shot now of infrared imagery of both of these systems, and convection has waned in Marco, and some people suggesting that, yeah, it may no longer be a hurricane already.
It wouldn't be particularly surprising considering its satellite appearance. It's been noted that it's been fighting against 20 to 25 knots of shear almost all day, and did really manage to become a hurricane more despite that than, just having plain favorable conditions that, for example, Laura might have in front of it in the future. There is new recon planes heading out right now. It looks like towards Marco, one potentially just taking off right now. That should get us a better look at the system within the next 2 to 3 hours at most, and we'll be able to actually see if this thing's still a hurricane or if it's actually weakened below hurricane force sustained winds.
Just going to keep looking at this imagery for a little while whilst I get some new imagery up for everyone. So in the meantime, I wonder if one of you here could grab some questions for us. Send any questions in, start your message with Force 13 all in text, whilst we continue to take a look at these, and I get this imagery, which will hopefully give us a better look at both of those storms in the Atlantic.
Would I be able to break in and talk about the 18Z GFS?
Sure.
I'm just looking at it now, and it initializes off. It has the center north of Cuba at hour 6, which is not where it is. But I'm going to post what it has for a landfall, and I hope someone can bring that up. It's very concerning given it has it maintaining intensity across Cuba and significantly further north.
We will get that as quick as we can.
Yeah, I got that pulled up right now, if anyone wants to see it. It has a 958 millibar storm at around 84 hours near the Texas-Louisiana border. This is the GFS, which sometimes doesn't really pull up on intensity as much, so definitely concerning to see that in particular. I think something very notable...
Given the incorrect initialization, which had the center further north and much more land interaction with Cuba,
wow.
I would personally adjust this further south so that it's near Houston and raise the intensity to a borderline category 4.
Yeah, I mean, one of the harder things with getting the exact intensity down for landfall time, at the exact moment at least, is, and the National Hurricane said this explicitly as well, is that because the landfall is expected between the days 3 and 4 spot, where you don't have an hour 84 position on official cones, that, the system might actually be, a good bit stronger than when you see the day 4 point, say, I think it's 105 miles an hour, if I'm not mistaken, for the 96-hour point. But that point's already inland past landfall, and they are expecting that it'll probably be stronger, of course, before it starts to move over land, which means that it's not really the best information source directly for maybe the landfall intensity until we get a bit closer to landfall and we can get higher certainty as well, which will very likely be within the next 24 hours or so. We'll start to see those 12-hour points much closer to land or near the landfall timing. It'll give us a better indication of what they're directly expecting a potential landfall intensity to be.
Absolutely.
Just getting up some rapid scan here. So there is Laura now on the right-hand side and on the left at the moment. But I'm just getting up Marco, which will also appear up there once I've sorted out the dimension of the screen, so we can get both of them on the screen at the same time on the GOES rapid scan imagery. Both of them looking decent on visible imagery, but that doesn't tell the whole story, does it? Let's see what questions we've got then. How bad could Laura be in Texas, particularly around Houston?
It's hard to pin down the exact impacts for any specific area right now, just because, the exact intensity is still quite track dependent, and that track forecast is still evolving significantly. It's a bit less certainty than usual for a 3 to 3.5 day point for the storm right now, although it is expected that significant impacts will likely be occurring somewhere along the northwest Gulf Coast. So if you're in the Houston area, and that's why you're asking about this specifically, I think the best thing you can do is stay up to date with the latest information with the storm. Always stay up to date with, if you're in a low-lying area, orders from local officials about any potential evacuations and such. By tomorrow evening, so about 24 hours from now, the exact picture really will begin to become significantly more clear for more portions of the Gulf Coast. So I'd say stay up to date with the latest information.
Plenty of questions about whether Laura will reach Category 3 status. It's almost overwhelmingly likely. Earlier today it was an 80% chance. I'm not sure what it is now. But the signs are very convincing either way.
Yes. Given the models are indicating that any intensity is possible, I mean, Laura is going to have perfect conditions for significant strengthening, rapid, if not explosive, intensification is possible, and the HWRF shows that a Category 5 is possible with its earlier run in the day.
Tell us more about that.
Well, at 12Z, the HWRF run from that time period, which was now 9 hours ago, it produced a Category 5 landfall just to the northeast of Cuba, of Houston.
Oh my goodness.
I do think something interesting, though, is the models, at least on intensity, at least the ones that I'm able to see, have backed off a little bit compared to earlier today, but not enough really to even say a major hurricane's unlikely from the system at this point, considering all terms, really. I haven't seen as many models, at least on 18Z, come out on a really high end saying, high end Cat 4, borderline Cat 5, compared to earlier today. But, that when you're coming with a major hurricane, that doesn't mean you should discount any potential threats, potentially, if it reaches that intensity, just because it isn't a Category 4 or 5 storm. A Category 3 is still extremely dangerous, and indications from the National Hurricane Center's forecast discussion, along with computer models, are that is a significant possibility that such an event could occur.
Absolutely, and if you want to share the graphic, I've posted the wind swap from that run, if you could bring it up.
Oh, I'll try and get that for you as soon as possible. There, for the time being, is the National Hurricane Center's forecast tracks for both storms right now. And you caught me off guard with that one, but here it is. That's the latest HWRF run. Now, that is I assume that is the most aggressive right now?
It is, yes. But it's not doing anything impossible. It's below the maximum potential intensity
Yeah.
given the conditions, which are as favourable as it gets in the Atlantic, pretty much.
It's not good. It all really depends on the storm's structure. I'll tell you what, one thing though, it's already at 60 miles an hour now. If it was to become a hurricane before clearing Cuba, then there's real big bother coming up when you look at that.
Because that shows it becoming a hurricane halfway through the Gulf.
Halfway through the Gulf.
Weakening below 50 knots as it traverses western Cuba for a time.
That's interesting. So, if it's a hurricane around there, then we got big problems.
I think one of the most notable things, too, really, just on this run, and it's basically a consensus at this point, that tropical storm conditions with sustained winds are likely to go significantly inland from just the coastline as well. This HWRF run shows, well up into Oklahoma and Arkansas in terms of latitude. The National Hurricane Center has this still at tropical storm strength as it crosses from Louisiana into Arkansas on their 5 p.m. Position update this afternoon on Thursday. So adverse impacts with wind and rain as the latest expectations of really wide swath of 4 to 6 inches of rainfall expected well into Arkansas as the latest Weather Prediction Center's graphic, meaning that at least with Laura, you're going to see potentially significant rainfall and flash flooding risk extend well inland and not just near the exact landfall location. So if you're further up into the United States, this is something you still need to monitor very closely as well. And this will probably likely exacerbate the impacts from Marco too, because it is expected that this will at least enhance some rainfall over portions of Louisiana that currently, as the latest Weather Prediction Center's graphic, are expected to get the heaviest rainfall from Marco right now.
And the ECMWF model earlier today was saying that Laura would retain tropical storm status right through the southern states and up towards, well, eventually leaving the outer banks of North Carolina still as a tropical storm and then strengthening into a hurricane again.
Was that the 12Z run, Nathan?
That was probably 0Z. I've not seen the 12Z on that.
Well, the 12Z was a bust for the Euro. It was initialised poorly, and we can't rely on it, I'm afraid, at this point.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, I would say it was more likely that such a thing were to occur a couple days ago, when the expectation was more that the system could likely make landfall along the Florida Panhandle and then exit off the eastern seaboard of the U.S., that it could maintain more tropicality. But because it's expected that it's going to likely make landfall significantly further west than old expectations, we're looking at a situation where it probably turns post-tropical and weakens over the central United States before it really gets the chance to do that right now.
The imagery that you're looking at here is pretty much live. The latest image at any given point is about 2 or 3 minutes old at most. In some instances, during Dorian last year, actually, we managed to get imagery as little as 16 seconds old. So you're really up to date looking at these images. What's more important is, what are they telling us? And a few more hot towers in the center of Marco right now, which I think may have been of interest, but a lot of cloud tops blowing up on the southern half of Laura as well. Convection really blowing up over the offshore Cuba.
And that's another thing that's potentially concerning Laura, is that a lot of its convection is displaced to the south of the centre, and should the centre decide to move southwards to be relocated under that convection, would move it a lot further off the coast.
Will land interaction weaken Laura before it goes into the Gulf? Hopefully enough to weaken it before any landfalls in the Gulf Coast.
That's the big kicker, isn't it?
Is it?
Well, we have no idea how much land interaction it's going to have at this time, and if it has significant land interaction, it might have a disorganized structure heading into the Gulf, whereas if it has little land interaction, it could already be a hurricane with a structure enabling further intensification.
And honestly, one of the worst parts with Laura right now, with this potential approach to the Gulf Coast, is that, again, it's probably going to be exasperating potential impacts from Marco, which does have hurricane warnings in place right now. I have this thing that I wanted to show on screen real quick, is just to give the sense of the volatility that we've really seen with the forecast tracks of the system. I have the 3-day one here explicitly show the change in trend, but this is Marco's archive graphics, really, and you can see initially the further west expectations towards a Texas landfall with the system was what we were expecting early on in the weekend, before the more major shift towards the landfall as a hurricane near New Orleans was the new expectation. And then as we've really gone back on through today, the new forecast cone, and I'll pull it up really quick because this is the 1 p.m. one. We'd gone from seeing something maybe way closer to southern Texas all the way to eastern Louisiana as the more likely location. If I just go off to the latest track really quick, you'll see they're expecting now it to really just skirt the coast and barely make landfall in Louisiana again before trying to head off towards Texas.
It's very peculiar.
Yeah, and it was even noted in the forecast discussion that most of the models no longer show a landfall in Louisiana anyways, and this was to maintain some continuity in case they shift back, and that was just a one-run shift. So,
a
lot of volatility really ongoing with Marco, and that's made preparations, of course, a bit more difficult than we'd really like to have. Fortunately, though, regardless of its exact movement along the northern Gulf Coast, we're going to see a situation where higher wind shear, which is already ongoing over the system.
Why does it keep doing that? Ignore that trail. It just does that on a timer for some reason. Just ignore that.
Oh, the trailer.
There it goes. I don't know.
It's been an interesting complex, though, to see expectations of Marco shift, pretty dramatically again and again over the past few days. I mean, now we're still looking at a situation where at least the remnants could be still over Texas, where the initial expectation is the storm would end up being there, 4 days ago at this point in time in midweek. So it's a very interesting thing to see develop.
I'm just taking a little look at the newest GFS run now, which has just come out. Well, is coming out, 18Z. Just seeing if it holds on to that Marco recurvature sort of thing. Not loading very quickly, but I think it had it moving sort of doing what the NHC is doing, maybe a little bit further north. I'll try and confirm that in a moment. But But it'd be very interesting to see if it has shifted back, because obviously no, it hasn't. It's still pretty much a curve away. Oh, what's this?
Yeah, just got this on screen. Isaac was able to put this earlier. This is one of the Cuba radars of Laura right now. So this is right along the eastern coast, or the very eastern part of Cuba. You can see Laura, the center of circulation, trying to get near
Oh my
Cuba
goodness!
right now.
Why does it keep doing that?
I mean, it's really
Sorry
interesting to see.
You can still see it down. I don't know, Strat.
It's
Gremlins in the
technical
system.
difficulties. It's a part of life. We roll with it.
Absolutely. I don't know why it's doing that.
Go ahead. One of the interesting things with Laura so far is that it still had a lot of its core convection displaced to the south and east of the center. So we're seeing the center try to get pretty close to trying to move on shore. But a lot of the main core thunderstorm activity is still displaced away from Cuba, and some of it's still trying to occur over a portion of Hispaniola, even though the center of the system has already moved well away from shore there.
And you'll be pleased to know that I've fixed it now. Thank you very much. So there it is, and quite clear that, well, the centre must only be a few miles offshore there.
Yes, it's recently made a jog towards the northwest, unexpectedly, given it's been trending relatively westward for the last 6 hours, and it could be very near to a landfall in Cuba. If it does so and gets disrupted significantly enough by the mountainous terrain there, it might force a early relocation southwards as well.
Did you
we still don't know what's going to happen.
Did you mention the GFS run earlier, the landfall in Texas?
We did.
Yeah, we did.
It's pretty much the same as HWRF, isn't it?
Well, a bit weaker, yes.
A bit weaker, but GFS has weak bias. So, again, that's interesting to see. Not looking good for those areas. Let's see if we've got some more questions then. Start your message with Force 13 all in text, and it'll light up for us. For instance, when is the next storm supposedly forming? Well, we're a little bit preoccupied at the moment, but there are 2 areas that could develop in the next 7 days in the central and western Atlantic. But not even worth thinking about at the moment whilst we're tracking these 2. And
if you want to talk about areas of interest, there's 2 high outs of development in the next 5 days in the eastern Pacific right now.
Well, there is that.
Both near Mexico's coastline. And Typhoon Bavi out in the western Pacific too.
Which we will touch on very shortly. This is the eastern Pacific right now, and you can see that disturbance on the right-hand side. That is looking pretty good, almost tropical cyclone by the looks of it. A little disturbance in the central area there as well. But now let's take a look at the western Pacific. And this is the latest imagery of Bavi, and it's taken us nearly half an hour to get onto it because it's weakened a little bit, actually, down to 75 miles an hour on the ATCF system. I believe it was 80 earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 80 earlier, I think. Unless we had 80, but I'm pretty sure it was definitely 80.
It does depend which agency you follow, of course, because that's the JTWC. The JMA have actually increased its intensity, but they started low at 65 miles an hour. They're now at 70.
Short of Typhoon, but the thing
Still
about the JMA...
short of Typhoon status, according to them.
Yeah, the thing about the JMA, though, is that they use 10-minute sustained winds, while the JTWC uses 1-minute sustained winds. So the JMA will have lower wind speeds than the JTWC usually.
But that's with that factored in, though.
Oh, really?
I will say there's the 2 fortunate things with Bavi right now is that the peak intensity expectations are a bit down from yesterday, even though it is still expected to be a powerful Category 2 equivalent on the Saffir-Simpson scale near Category 3 strength. The other thing, though, which was likely more important, is that the forecast track shifted west by a pretty decent amount within the past 48 hours, and the current expectations, at least from the JTWC, I haven't seen the JMA's forecast track, is that a landfall will not occur in South Korea, and that it's exceedingly unlikely that typhoon-sustained winds will occur in South Korea with this system, but that they could still get tropical storm force or gale force winds along portions of the western half of the country, including Seoul around day 4 or so. It's more likely now to actually see a typhoon landfall try to clip part of North Korea before moving up into Manchuria and China, believe it or not.
There it
So I
goes.
don't think
Probably
that's something
Russia
that
as well.
Yeah, it'll probably move up into Russia, it looks like, as a remnant system. And I'll pull up the forecast track really quickly as well.
Oh, okay.
Here's the forecast track from the JTWC really quick, just for ease of people seeing it on the stream.
Yeah.
West, significantly of 2 days ago, when we were looking at potentially a near Category 3 landfall around Busan, was the old expectation. Now, again, doesn't rule out significant rainfall threats for Jeju, along with gale force winds, and the same
Certainly
for
could shift
portions
back.
of the western half. It could, and that's still something to keep in mind as well.
You were talking about 200 millimeters of rain for a lot of those areas.
Absolutely.
All right, then, we're going to take a short break here. We're back in just a couple of minutes whilst we gather our thoughts. And write in your questions. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. Stay tuned. Yes, we're back again in the studio here. We're tracking these two tropical cyclones. This is Hurricane Marco and Tropical Storm Laura, left and right. And as you saw at the back end of that trail there, you can go to the Force 13 US channel, which has the satellite imagery like this on a 24-hour stream, basically, on our US channel. So you can take a look at that raw feed, or you can stay here whilst we're streaming, or you could indeed go to our 24/7 stream on the main channel, which are covering all three systems in equal measures. Let's see if we've got some questions then. Is there a chance of Laura reforming near North Carolina and hitting the Northeast?
I think we went over this briefly, but...
Did you?
We mentioned earlier, because some people, we were talking about the European trying to initially redevelop the system a bit, but because Laura is now expected
Well,
to...
I meant out at sea, though.
I mean, we talked about it briefly, but because Laura's expected to make landfall further west than before, along the western Gulf Coast now, instead of potentially the Florida Panhandle, which was the older expectation, it's very likely that it turns post-tropical over the central United States, around Appalachia at the latest, and will have a pretty low chance of becoming a full tropical cyclone again if it tries to move off of the East Coast with structure left to it. Models were trying to say 2 to 3 days ago that it could try to reform off the coast of the Carolinas and move out to sea. That's not very likely now, though, at this point.
All right, let's speak to some more people on the ground then. Let's speak to Uxadata. You're joining us from Central Florida, out of these cones by some distance now, but I imagine you're still taking an interest in these storms.
Oh yeah, of course. They could still impact. They could still impact. The Panhandle. Could still impact Alabama, Mississippi. So really, we can't stay off guard. And plus, recently we've been getting quite a few rain bands that seem to be they seem to have a little bit of convection in them.
Interesting.
I'm not sure if that was the right term for that, but
Rotation?
oh, yeah, a little bit. But
Mike, you're also in Florida. I always forget where exactly you are, but how are things over there?
We had generally thought that the storm could have been a threat 72 hours ago, but now obviously things have changed drastically over the past 3 days, and we're not expecting much. And the most we're getting from any of these two systems is Marco. Due to the high amount of wind shear that's consistent with Marco, the rain that's being swapped off the top of the system, it's actually being brought over here to my area in Central Florida.
You're Central Florida as well, yeah. I keep getting you confused with Wyatt, who's in Pensacola, because you've got rather similar voices. Let's see, who else could we talk to? Well, Ryan, we've heard little bits from you, but maybe some clearer thoughts from you on these two systems right now, and Laura in particular, I suppose, because it does appear to be getting some strength about it, and do you think it could go all the way?
Go all the way to where?
All the way to, well, what some of the models are envisioning.
Oh, to what some of the models? Well, it is a possibility. The conditions are there, but I think I don't want to say that Laura's going to be a Category 5 just yet. Definitely nowhere near to making any sort of predictions of, yes, it could be a significant hurricane for, the Texas, Louisiana area, no doubt about it, but I really don't know if it's probably going to be, I think that Category 2, maybe Category 3 is certainly possible, but anything higher than that, I don't know just yet.
I don't think anyone can accuse you of hype there. Can Marco look back into the Gulf, is the question.
Probably
Loop back into the Gulf.
Well, the GFS showed it moving towards the coast, and then just before making landfall, turning west, paralleling the coast of Louisiana, and then making a landfall as a minimal system near the Texas-Louisiana border. So it seems to be moving inland, but just staying offshore while weakening for a long time at this point.
I have the model spread up right now if you want to see that really quick. Of course, this isn't, the official forecast or anything, but there was a very significant shift again in the 18Z models.
Oh my goodness.
That pulled the mean model run and the median to show no landfall in Louisiana, although the latest National Hurricane Center forecast count is north of those, as they stated in their discussion, specifically to maintain some sort of continuity because of the level of the shift that really occurred.
Is that the actual UK Met model there that's not having a landfall in Texas either?
I think it's the UKXI is what it says there. UKXT.
Oh, it's an interpolated model. Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of these are interpolated models. So don't use this as anything official. But this is just an indication of some of the spread that's ongoing right now. But again, pretty significant shift from even yesterday when we were much more leaning towards an actual full landfall in Louisiana. This probably means that the harshest winds are increasingly likely to stay just offshore because Marco does have a relatively small wind field, including a small hurricane force wind field. So if it maintains hurricane strength up towards the coastline, if it stays, say, 15 miles offshore, especially as it's supposed to start weakening at that time period beyond 24 hours due to high wind shear that it's really already under. It's currently under 20 to 25 knots. If it stays, anywhere near the GFS one, for example, the interpolate is the AVNI, it's the red line, then Louisiana could escape hurricane force sustained winds from Marco if just barely.
Well, at the moment, it's showing no signs of turning just yet.
No, it isn't.
You look at what's in front of us, the satellite imagery, and still no westward element in that movement at all, and that's the first thing you'll be looking out for. Would anyone like to read out the warnings from Marco right now? Or in a moment.
I'll pull them up here real quick. I just got
Alright,
so many warnings.
Does Houston have a chance to get impacted by both storms?
Marco might not bring anything more than some rainfall, perhaps 1 to 2 inches at most. Not really any wind impacts, but obviously Laura is a much bigger concern for that area.
Alright, so I got the warnings here. This is for Marco. A storm surge warning is in effect for Morgan City, Louisiana to Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and Lake Bourne. A hurricane warning is in effect for Morgan City, Louisiana to the mouth of the Pearl River. I believe that is in Mississippi. Or it might be on the Mississippi-Alabama border. Yeah, I think it. Okay. Anyway, a storm surge watch is in effect for Sabine Pass to Morgan City, Louisiana, as well as for Ocean Springs, Mississippi to the Mississippi-Alabama border, including Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Marepa. I believe that's how you pronounce it. A hurricane watch is in effect for Intracoastal City to Morgan City, as well as for Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Marepa, and metropolitan New Orleans. A tropical storm warning is in effect for mouth of the Pearl River to the Mississippi-Alabama border, as well as for Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Marepa, and metropolitan New Orleans, as well as for Cameron, Louisiana, to Morgan City, Louisiana, and a tropical storm watch is in effect for the Mississippi-Alabama border to the Alabama-Florida border, aka the Alabama coast. All right.
Yeah, pretty much all of those. And with regards, Laura, tropical storm warning in effect for the whole of Haiti, the whole of Cuba, if I'm not mistaken.
You are not mistaken.
The Cayman Islands. I think all of those as well.
Yes, it was that way. That's why I saw it.
As well as two Inagua and the Ragged Islands in the southeastern Bahamas, and a tropical storm watch for the Florida Keys from Cray Key to Key West and the Dry Tortugas. So tropical storm watches and warnings on that one as well. And that's the latest there.
Something that I have noticed, Laura, is that radar indicates that northwestward motion has continued, and it might have indeed made landfall near the radar station in the last few minutes.
That wouldn't be the hugest surprise. Let's see if we've got those imageries again, see if they're showing anything new. Just make sure this is up to date. You can see it there, and it's hard to tell, but if that is indeed its center that I'm looking at, it's hard to depict it on the screen.
There's a gap of light rain.
Yeah, that could well be a landfall there. But then again, in the same breath, there are two distinct areas there, and you never know when another centre of circulation might pop up.
Not at all.
Ooh.
And another thing to note is that the HWRF 18V has just begun to come out, and it has perfectly initialized.
It's perfectly initialized, so, well, we'll wait with bated breath on that one then.
Indeed.
Could San Antonio get hit by a tropical storm?
It wouldn't be particularly likely for the strongest winds to get in, up to San Antonio, just because it's significantly inland. But, in theory, if a significant hurricane makes landfall in the right part of Texas and moving the right direction, you could get tropical storm force winds reaching San Antonio if the storm's not moving at a very slow pace. If you're that far inland, though, typically you're looking at the most significant impact to be, let's say, a hurricane's making landfall near the Corpus Christi area, moving, west-northwest or northwest. How much rainfall are you going to get from that system? That's going to be your main concern if you're that far inland, usually.
It looks like we can confirm at this point that Laura has made landfall. And the landfall location is obviously the coast of Cuba. And I'm trying to find an exact location on that one, proving to be rather tricky. Not far from Guantanamo, a little bit south of there. Well, somewhere around that area. east of Santiago de Cuba, at least.
It's a bit more apparent on visible now. You can kind of see a little area of general rotation moving just on shore right now, barely to the north of that, or north-northeast of that massive blowup of convection that's continuing to be just offshore of southern Cuba right now.
Yeah, so there we are. Let's see if we can get this. This is the latest infrared as well. And there you can see, actually, it's probably better presented. That little blue slot, if you look very closely in LoRa on the right-hand side of the image, a tiny little blue slot there is probably the center of the storm. That looks like it's landfall there. And again, that is around... well, nowhere in particular. Looks like a small village by the name of Tortuguilla, which is southeast of Guantanamo. Looks to be the landfall point for LoRa at this hour. So it looks like a landfall here, and looking at Marco as well, it's tried to get some more hot towers going, but it does look like it's on borrowed time.
Yeah, Marco's definitely started to degrade in appearance. You know, the deepest convection really struggling, and a lot of it's being lifted up to the north and east. I think the notable thing, and you can see it on kind of the wider shot with the infrared as well, is that even though the storm's right now expected to try to make a curve off to the northwest and then make a more of a westward move and try to be on the coastline of Louisiana moving west towards Texas, that significant rainfall impacts from the system could be pulled further off to the north and east just because this wind shear is trying to whip off convection and the thunderstorm activity away from the center of the storm. You know, we had a situation with Isaias earlier in the month where that shear was taking convection and thunderstorm activity and pushing it just offshore Florida instead, pushing it away from the coast, allowing them to escape the system mostly untouched. But when you have a system moving north and the thunderstorm activity is being moved northward towards land ahead of the system, even if it makes a turn off towards the west, you could see impacts from the system, unfortunately, happening sooner to land and in areas that aren't going to be exactly necessarily close to where the center does end up tracking.
Hey Nathan, speaking on what Strat just put, can you pull up my radar image?
We'll get that just a moment here. Let's see. Have we got... There it is. Go ahead.
Well, I just want the people to see, speaking of the shear, you can see this is over an hour of radar footage, and there's hardly any motion from east to west. You see it a little bit in that blob near Houma, Louisiana. You can see it a little bit on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay, which is Daphne, Fairhope area. But unfortunately, the L3 attributes have gone down. But most of these things are tracking at something like 10 knots. And if you look off of the little tip of Louisiana down south, when the L3 attributes were going on, the blob that is just coming ashore there is the fastest moving part of it at about 25 knots to the northeast. So that just shows you how hard it's being sheared, is that, you know, the fastest moving storm is headed away from the direction of circulation.
Oh dear. And that is actually a very... I wasn't going to point it out, but I did notice that when you look at the infrared imagery, the rotation's really winding down.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's just not looking that good. Obviously, that is good news for the coast of Louisiana. And certainly better news for issues in terms of storm surge and things like that, because you'll still have the storm surge coming through the Chandelier Islands, the north side of Jefferson Parish there, into Plaquemines, and even into Lake Bourne, Lake Maurepas, Lake Pontchartrain. But if this thing does wind down because of the shear, it's going to spare everybody a lot of trouble, which could have major impacts down the road for the people in western Louisiana, eastern Texas, if that's where LoRa strikes, because there won't be so much manpower used to getting things like power, sewage, and other necessities back together for eastern Louisiana.
Indeed. Keep your questions coming in. Start your message with Force 13 all in text, and we'll try and answer your questions. Is it possible for Laura to move west and make landfall in South Texas?
It's a possibility, but it seems rather unlikely given that Marco is going to create a weakness that should move it northwards nearer the after the 3-day point.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how the cones adjusted again tonight with the National Hurricane Center, and again as we head into tomorrow as the system exits Cuba. But there was actually a very slight shift to the east between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Time for Laura's cone. And it actually goes to someone's question asking about Beaumont in Texas, which is pretty close to Port Arthur. The 5 p.m. cone and the 11 a.m. cone would indicate a landfall pretty close to that area. So if that happens, you likely would get significant impacts and be under a hurricane warning. So if you're there, make sure you're taking the proper precautions right now and staying up to date with the latest information, of course, as well. Generally, though, I think it's important to stress still, this is very easily could be a strong hurricane as it makes landfall, but the exact location and intensity isn't really known quite yet, and it won't be really more clear until early Tuesday when the system really clears off of Cuba and we get to see what its full structure is looking like. So everyone really along the northwestern Gulf Coast right now should just be having the proper preparations in place and taking precautions alongside orders from local officials because, of course, Marco's a threat right now for Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and even Florida with rainfall and potentially wind impacts and storm surge heading into tomorrow. But if you want to look at Laura when you get towards the middle of the week, that could be a potentially very significant system for land areas, but the exact point to pin down isn't there quite yet.
I don't like it. I don't like Laura.
I don't think any of us do.
The eastern part of Cuba is pretty much the last area that can really stop it in its tracks.
Oh. That's interesting.
Well, isn't it mountainous on the eastern side much more than the central and western side?
Well, that's true. Laura's already passed over the most mountainous part of the Caribbean.
It has indeed, and it's strengthened whilst doing it.
Which is very, very concerning, to be honest.
I've been looking at the H1 and HWRF. The early frames have come out.
Yep.
The H1 initializes further north of the center of where it is currently, moves it over more of Cuba, has it more disrupted by land interaction, moves it into the Gulf of Mexico as a broad and disorganized system, and immediately commences strengthening, losing 6 millibars in 6 hours.
Oh my goodness.
Meanwhile, the HWRF moves it a bit closer to the coast, slightly stronger intensity, but still not strengthening or weakening. Then as it moves into the bay to the north of the Isle of Youth, it does a center relocation to the southwest, placing a center of 996 millibars over the southern part of that bay. And it looks like it's strengthening before it reaches western Cuba.
Well, ain't that peachy.
Yeah.
What is the CDPS stage for both storms? I don't know the answer to that either. I haven't done the calculations. I'd imagine that Marco is probably a 3.
That's what I thought as well.
Laura is probably... I've not seen rainfall estimates, but I imagine that could be a 3 as well.
For now.
Rain estimates for where?
Anywhere ahead of its track.
Oh.
I imagine they're pretty high. Could wind shear affect Laura later when it moves into the Gulf of Mexico? Well, that's the whole point, really, isn't it? There is none when it gets there. Is what the models are saying.
It's going to have an upper level atmospheric feature called an upper level anticyclone appropriately, and that would increase its outflow, help the storm breathe better, and basically provide it with a next to zero shear environment.
Could Laura be affected by Marco's cold trail? Not really, because sea surface temperatures were 31 degrees, and considering Marco is moving quite quickly, it's probably only brought it down 1 or 2 degrees at most. Could Marco ride the coast and loop back into the Gulf? Well, models are getting closer to that solution.
Interestingly, it was noted in the 5 p.m. discussion that the consensus model runs, the mean between them, indicates that would occur, but that the reason they haven't pulled that trigger yet is for sake of continuity, because that was really just the newest model run that went off that end. So they want to really play it safe right now in case that actually reverts back in the 0Z runs when they come out in a couple hours from now. Actually, we should really get those within 2 hours, to be honest.
Can Marco fizzle out before further impacting Louisiana?
It could certainly weaken a bit, but
I don't
I'm
think
sure Nelson can say what he thinks it's going to do.
It won't completely fizzle out. It just won't.
Yeah, I agree.
Hello?
Hello, who's this?
Isaac?
Good evening to you, and welcome aboard. What are your thoughts? I mean, you are in the southern part of Texas. I don't suppose you're expecting anything from these two systems, but you never know in a year like this.
Exactly. I was just came back. I was alerting my because I have family in the Houston, Galveston area, and I was making sure that they were prepared and they're all prepared, ready to go in case worst comes to worst here with this storm. They went through Ike, and I'm sure that was a really bad experience for them, and I'm sure they don't want to go through it again with this storm. So I made sure that they're prepared. They are prepared. They're ready to go in case worst comes to worst there. I'm also prepared too in case the track continues to deviate more to the west here with time. We'll of course see. But just make sure you're prepared for this. This is going to be a what looks like a serious storm here, if it isn't already, with its impacts here over the island of Hispaniola and now going over. It looks like Cuba now, according to radar, because I have radar up right now from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and it's showing the storm going over the not going over the radar site, but just barely missing the radar sites to the north.
Really looking mean on the late visible images is Laura, but most of that is displaced to the south of its center by some distance now.
And I have my I have the radar from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the eastern part of Cuba, up on my screen here if you want to look at it really quick here. But it looks pretty organized on radar here. I don't know what you guys are thinking about it.
Certainly does, and you can see it there. If that is indeed the center, that's gone well inland now.
Yeah, it's taken by the looks of it. If you said that if that is the actual center, it's taken a pretty decent jog to the northwest. It looks like northwest or maybe just slightly north of west track there. Looking at radar here, and this is radar again off of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and it's just really interesting to note how it's just held up so well together inland here by the looks of it on radar.
Well, there we have it. There it is again on the visible imagery. I'm pretty sure that is the center.
Another interesting thing about this moving northwest inland is that it's exactly what the HWRF predicted.
Oh no.
And then after moving inland northwest, it moves fairly close to due west, a little bit north of it, and in 6 hours, 9 hours, it's back over the West Caribbean. So the HWRF wanted this brief northwestward jog and then resuming nearer to west motion. So we'll have to see if it follows the rest of the early part of that run.
So there we have it. Hurricane warnings remain in effect for the coast of Louisiana, but that's going to be the extent of our coverage for this hour. There will be plenty more updates across the channel, across our social media. Search Force 13 on Facebook and Twitter. And of course on our YouTube channel with more storm updates this evening expected. And you can track the storms on our 3 live streams right now. The 24/7 stream on the Force 13 main channel, and 2 satellite imagery views of Laura and Marco on the Force 13 US channel. Search Force 13 US for that to see the storms in real time. Any final thoughts from the team before we finish up here?
Well, just make sure you're prepared for this likely to be a hurricane here after it goes over the island of Cuba here. This has really good conditions to be able to rapidly intensify here, unfortunately, over the Gulf of Mexico. You got the sea surface temperatures are bathwater warm for this. Winds here are supposed to be near zero, if anything. Good outflow, good everything. Pretty much good everything. The only thing that will be stopping it at this point in time, we think at least, will be land itself and the storm itself, if it has any internal structural issues going off of when it goes off Cuba, like the National Hurricane Center forecast. But make sure you're prepared for this, especially you guys in Louisiana and then over in the Houston, Galveston area of Texas, Beaumont area of Texas. Be prepared for this and be prepared for Marco, because that's going to be coming up over Louisiana as well too shortly. So just be prepared for this. These are 2 serious threats to the United States here, and hope everybody has a safe night here.
Very aptly put, on behalf of everyone, I should think. We'll be checking in with people during live events tomorrow as well, and onwards, as I'm sure you'll be aware by now. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back probably with another live stream tomorrow morning.